Have you ever watched someone realize they've made a terrible mistake in real time? January 18, 1948. Decca Records, Studio A. 5 white executives thought they could control Billie Holiday. What happened in the next 12 minutes would haunt them for the rest of their careers. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Decca Records, New York City. January 18, 1948. 2:30 p.m. The snow was falling outside the 14th floor windows, muffling the sounds of the city below. Inside Studio A, the silence felt different. Heavy. Charged. Like the air before a thunderstorm that would change everything. Billie Holiday sat in the corner chair, her hands folded in her lap, watching the executives file into the room like judges entering a courtroom. She'd been in meetings like this before. The manila folders full of charts and numbers. The expensive suits that cost more than most people made in a year. The careful way they avoided direct eye contact. She knew this wasn't going to be a normal recording session. The studio was smaller than it looked in promotional photographs. Wood paneling that had absorbed decades of conversations like this one. A Steinway piano sat in the corner, its black surface reflecting overhead lights. Microphones hung from the ceiling like mechanical fruit. 5 men took their places around the mahogany table. Milt Gabler, Decca's head of A&R, adjusted his tie for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. He'd handled difficult artists before. Drunk singers who missed sessions. Prima donnas who demanded impossible contract changes. But this felt different. This was about a song. And songs, Milt was beginning to understand, could be more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. "Billie," Milt said, his voice carefully modulated, "we need to discuss your recording schedule moving forward." Dave Kapp, the label president, opened a manila folder. Papers rustled like dry leaves. His expression was neutral, professional. Like a banker about to foreclose on a house whose owners had missed too many payments. "What about it?" Billie asked. Her voice was steady, but those who knew her could hear the warning underneath. "Strange fruit," Dave said. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Like discussing the weather. "It's not working for us anymore." The silence that followed was complete. The session musicians who'd been setting up equipment froze mid-motion. A saxophone player looked up from his sheet music. Tommy, the recording engineer, stopped adjusting microphones, his young face suddenly alert. Everyone in that room knew what Strange Fruit meant to Billie Holiday. It wasn't just a song in her repertoire. It was a statement carved from pain. A cry from somewhere deeper than her vocal cords. A wound that wouldn't heal because she wouldn't let it. The song had been following her for years. Since 1939, when she first heard those lyrics and felt them settle into her bones like fever. The executives had been uncomfortable from the beginning. But they tolerated it because Billie Holiday sold records. But something had changed. The tolerance was gone. Says who? Billie's voice remained calm, but something flickered behind her eyes. Says the company, Jack Kapp interjected. He was older than his brother Dave, more direct. Says our distributors in the South. Says the radio stations who won't play it. Says the venues who won't book acts that perform it. He rattled off the list like stock prices from the morning paper. Clinical. Detached. As if discussing a manufacturing defect rather than a song about murdered children. Says the audience research. Another executive added. Billie couldn't remember his name. Thompson? Turner. But she recognized the type. Young, ambitious, the kind who believed every human emotion could be quantified and turned into profit margins. Says the focus groups. He continued, warming to his topic. Says the market research. Says the test markets in key demographics. The words piled up like evidence in a trial where the verdict had already been decided. Billie stood up slowly. The movement was deliberate, controlled. She walked to the microphone in the center of the room, her heels clicking against polished hardwood. Each step echoed like a countdown to something irreversible. The executives watched her move, feeling their carefully planned meeting slip out of control. "You want me to pretend that song doesn't exist," she said. It wasn't a question. "We want you to focus on what sells," Milt said. He'd probably rehearsed this conversation a dozen times. Love songs. Jazz standards. The beautiful ballads that made you famous. Songs that showcase your incredible voice without. He trailed off, unwilling to finish. Without what? Billie asked, fingers resting on the microphone stand. Without controversy, Dave said, stepping in. Without politics. Without complications. And leave the rest to rot? Leave the controversy to others, Dave said, voice gaining confidence. You're an entertainer, not an activist. There are people whose job it is to fight social battles. Your job is to make beautiful music. What's the difference? She asked quietly. Dave blinked, genuinely confused. I'm sorry. Between entertaining people and telling them the truth. What's the difference? The question hung like smoke. The executives exchanged glances, each hoping someone else would field this. They hadn't expected philosophical questions. Jack Cap leaned forward. Lady Day, he said, using her stage name like a caress, be reasonable. You're one of the greatest jazz singers alive. Your voice is a gift. Why waste it on something that divides people? Why not stick to music that brings people together? It was good strategy. Appealed to her ego. Makes silence seem like artistry. Divides people? Billie's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her composure. You mean music that makes white folks uncomfortable while black folks keep dying? Music that doesn't remind anyone about bodies hanging from trees. The temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. The unnamed executive shifted uncomfortably. Milt stared at his hands. Dave's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something like fear. When I sing that song, Billie continued, walking closer to their table, something happens in that room. White people stop pretending they don't know what's happening to us. Black people stop feeling so alone with their pain. She was close enough now that they had to look up at her. That's not dividing people. That's forcing them to look at the same truth at the same time. That's making it impossible for anyone to pretend they don't know what strange fruit really means. The truth, Dave said, trying to regain control, is that radio stations won't play it. Distributors won't ship it. Venues won't book you if you insist on performing it. You're limiting your career, Billie. You're cutting off opportunities. And you're asking me to limit my soul, she said quietly. The words came out like a prayer, like a confession, like an accusation. Tommy, the young recording engineer, had stopped all pretense of working. He stood frozen by his equipment, watching this conversation unfold like a car accident in slow motion, knowing he was witnessing something that would matter long after this meeting was over. Milt tried a softer approach. Billie, we're not saying you can never sing it again. Just not on our records. Not as part of your official repertoire. You could perform it in smaller venues. Private settings. Smaller venues, Billie repeated slowly, tasting the words like bitter medicine. Private settings. Where it won't reach too many people. Where it won't cause too much trouble. Where it can't do too much damage to the comfortable lives you're all living. She turned away from them, facing the microphone again. The studio fell silent except for quiet hum of recording equipment and distant sound of snow tapping against windows. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 20. 30. I have a question, Billie said finally, her voice so quiet they had to strain to hear. Have any of you ever seen one? The men exchanged glances. The question seemed to come from nowhere, but they all knew what she meant. Dave opened his mouth, then closed it. No one answered. I was 14, Billie continued, her voice taking on a different quality. Distant. Like speaking from another time, another place where innocence had died on a summer night. Baltimore. Summer of 1929. They came for him at 3 in the morning. The executives shifted uncomfortably. They'd come to discuss business contracts and market research, not receive testimony from a witness to history they preferred to forget. 17 years old. His name was Marcus Thompson. Worked at the docks during the day, studied at night. Wanted to be a teacher. The studio felt smaller with each word. The snow against windows seemed louder. I was staying with my cousin that summer. 3 blocks away from where it happened. We heard the trucks. Heard the voices getting louder as more men joined. Heard the screaming. Dave wanted to interrupt, to steer this back to safer ground, but something in her voice stopped him. The quiet authority of a witness. My cousin tried to keep me inside. Locked the door. Told me to stay away from the windows. But I was 14 and curious and stupid, and I thought it was just noise. Just people arguing. She turned around slowly, facing the executives. Her eyes were clear, but there was something behind them. A distance that stretched back through years of carrying this memory. So I climbed out onto the fire escape. And I saw them. The silence was complete. Even the snow seemed to pause. 50 men, maybe more. White men with ropes and gasoline and faces I recognized from the neighborhood grocery store. From the church I passed going to school. From the bank where my cousin cashed her paycheck every Friday. Jack's face had gone pale. Milt was staring at his hands. The unnamed executive looked anywhere but at Billy. They didn't just kill him. They took their time. Hours. They wanted him to suffer. They wanted everyone watching to understand what happened to boys who forgot their place. She paused, letting the words settle like dust. And when it was over, you know what happened? Nothing. No arrests. No investigation. No justice. Just another family burying an empty coffin while the men who did it went home to their wives and children and Sunday dinners. Her voice was steady, matter-of-fact, which somehow made it worse. His name was Marcus Thompson. He saved every penny to buy books. Used grammar books and poetry collections. He wrote letters to his mother every week, telling her about his plans to save money for teachers' college. The unnamed executive, Thompson, winced at the name but said nothing. So when you ask me to stop singing about it, Billy said, what you're really asking is for me to let Marcus die twice. Once on that tree in 1929, and once more in the silence you want me to keep in 1948. The executives sat in uncomfortable silence. Dave opened his mouth, then closed it. Jack drummed his fingers once, then stopped. It's a business decision, the unnamed executive said quietly. Market research shows that controversial material limits mainstream appeal. Market research? Billy almost smiled, and there was something terrible in that smile. You've done market research on lynching? His face flushed red. That's not what I meant. Did you ask your focus groups about Marcus Thompson? Did you test how his mother felt when she had to identify her son by the shirt he was wearing? Dave cleared his throat. Billy, we have obligations. To shareholders, to distributors. We can't build a sustainable company around material that alienates major market segments. I understand business, Billy said, walking to the piano. But this isn't business. This is memory. Her fingers found the keys. The opening notes of Strange Fruit filled the air like smoke. Haunting. Inescapable. This song doesn't belong to me, she said as she played. It belongs to Marcus. It belongs to every black body that's been swaying from those trees. It belongs to every mother who's had to identify her child by the clothes they were wearing because their face was gone. The executives were frozen. They'd expected a business negotiation. Instead, they were receiving testimony. It belongs to every person who's ever been told to stay quiet about injustice, because speaking up makes other people uncomfortable. The melody swelled, filling the small studio with something that sounded like prayer and accusation combined. You want to know why I won't stop singing this song? Because silence is complicity. Because when good people say nothing, evil people think they have permission. She looked directly at them as her hands moved across the keys. Because someone has to remember. Someone has to speak for the dead. Dave tried one more time. Billy, there are other ways to make a statement. Ways that don't hurt your commercial prospects. You could support civil rights organizations privately. You don't have to do it through your music. Billy stopped playing. The silence was deafening. Mr. Cap, she said, her voice steel wrapped in silk, tell me something. If your son was hanging from a tree, would you want people to sing gentle love songs while his body rotted in the wind? Or would you want someone to scream loud enough that the whole world had to pay attention? The question hung in the air like smoke. Dave's face went pale. His hands trembled as he reached for his water glass. Would you want people to make donations in private, while pretending publicly that nothing happened? Dave couldn't speak. That's what I thought, Billy said quietly. Milt made one last desperate attempt. We can compromise. Maybe a different protest song. Something less graphic. Something that makes the point without being so explicit. Less graphic. Billy's voice was dangerously quiet now. You want me to make lynching more palatable? More digestible for white sensibilities? She stood from the piano bench. Should I sing about strange fruit that doesn't smell quite so bad? Strange fruit that doesn't twist quite so violently in the wind? Billie. No, she said, cutting through his interruption. No compromise. No watered-down version. No gentle protest that doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. She walked toward them. Either you let me sing the truth, or you don't get to have me at all. The ultimatum hung like a blade. The executives looked at each other, each waiting for someone else to make the decision. Finally, Jack spoke. We can't have our artists alienating major portions of our audience. We can't build a business around songs that radio won't play and distributors won't ship. And I have responsibilities to Marcus, Billie said. To his mother. To all the mothers. To all the children who might be next if people keep staying quiet. She walked toward the door, heels clicking like a countdown. At the doorway she stopped and turned back. You know what the saddest part is? You think I'm the one being unreasonable. You think I'm the one making trouble. But all I'm doing is refusing to pretend that murdered children don't matter. Where are you going? Milt asked. To find people who understand the difference between music and truth, Billie said. People who know that sometimes they're the same thing. She opened the door then paused. Oh, and gentlemen, that song you're so afraid of is going to outlive all of us. People will be singing it long after your contracts are forgotten and your stock prices don't matter. She looked at each of them in turn. Because truth has a funny way of surviving, even when powerful men try to bury it. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The 5 executives sat in the silence that followed. Dave closed his manila folder with a sharp snap. Milt loosened his tie. Jack stared out the window at the falling snow. Tommy, the recording engineer, slowly began packing his equipment. As he coiled cables and stored microphones, he hummed quietly to himself. The melody was unmistakable. The executives heard it and tried to pretend they didn't. Dave shuffled papers. Milt checked his watch. Jack studied the snow falling on the city below. But the humming continued. Soft. Persistent. Filling the spaces between their breathing. 20 minutes later, the studio was empty. The executives had left through different doors, taken different elevators, gone back to different offices where they could pretend the conversation had been about business and nothing more. But Tommy's humming had followed them out of the studio and down the hallways and into the elevators and out onto the street where the snow was still falling. The contract renewal meeting was never rescheduled. Billie Holiday walked out of Decca Records that day and found other ways to make her records. Smaller labels. Independent producers. People who understood that some songs couldn't be reduced to market research. She kept singing Strange Fruit. At every performance in every venue that would have her. Years later, when music journalists asked the executives about that day, most claimed they couldn't remember the details. It had been a routine business meeting that hadn't worked out. But Dave Kapp never listened to jazz music again after that day. Milt Gabler left the record industry within 2 years. Jack Kapp sold his shares and moved to Florida. And sometimes, late at night when the city was quiet and the snow was falling like it had that day in 1948, they would find themselves humming a melody they couldn't identify. A slow, mournful tune that seemed to come from somewhere deep in their memory. They always remembered the humming. Even when they tried to forget everything else about that day, they always remembered the humming. Because some things once heard cannot be unheard. Some truths once spoken cannot be unspoken. Some songs once sung echo forever in the silence they leave behind. And in that echo Marcus Thompson's name lived on. Not in the comfortable silence the executives had wanted, but in the dangerous truth Billie Holiday refused to abandon. The strange fruit still hung from the trees. But now at least someone was singing about it. Someone was remembering. Someone was refusing to let the dead die twice.